The topic of history is fascinating when looking at evidences of Scripture. What else can we look at as far as history goes that provides support for Scripture?
Well, as we've mentioned, there's not going to be one piece of evidence that just conclusively proves everything that we're attributing or trying to attribute to the biblical record. But we take them in their entirety, and all the different types of evidence point to the validity, the reliability of what we have in the Scriptures. One that's interesting to me, I'm not a Chinese scholar. I'm not schooled in the language of the Chinese, but there's a book called God's Promise to the Chinese, written by Ethel R. Nelson and Richard Broadberry, where they catalog and document symbols in the Chinese language that coincide with the Genesis account of creation. And it's pretty fascinating to think about one of the oldest civilizations that we refer to in history books and that we look at in the world. And even in their own language, we see elements of what the book of Genesis records for you and I in the story of creation. For instance, in the Chinese language, it's not a language of an alphabet where letters are combined to form words, but it's symbols. And these simple symbols that are, can mean words like speak or dust or life can be combined together to make more complex symbols to convey or communicate a different word or a more complex idea. Just for instance, the symbol in the Chinese language to mean create is a combination of simpler symbols meaning speak, dust, life, and walk. What does that sound like? It sounds like God's account of creating man from what? The dust of the ground, and breathing into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. The Chinese symbol for garden is the combination of the simpler components of dust, breath, two people, enclosure. Those combined make up the more complex or symbolic idea of garden. Another one is forbidden. In the Chinese language, to communicate the idea of something being forbidden or to warn against something. The symbols used are two trees and their symbol for God. The tempter is secret, man, garden, alive, being the devil. And then combining that complex idea of the devil with two trees and to cover is the tempter. To covet or desire, two trees plus woman. To covet or desire. And then one that's really interesting, especially since we're talking about the flood, is the symbol in the Chinese language for the word boat. Vessel, 8, the number 8, and people. Now, where did the creators of the Chinese language come up with an idea for their word and their language representing a boat to be combined of these simpler ideas of a vessel and 8 people? You see, what we see is that there's a commonality and an original source to even where the Chinese language came from. And the creators of the Chinese language went back and used elements of what we read in our Bibles in the book of Genesis to construct the way that they would communicate centuries later after these things were written and conceived and transmitted to you and I today. Fascinating evidence to think about.